At the retreat session of the 41st ASEAN Summit, His Majesty delivered a TTAP highlighting that ASEAN was able to work with its partners and find opportunities to enhance its cooperation despite the challenges due to the multidimensional impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. His Majesty also stresses that heightened geopolitical tension threatens to hinder the progress of ASEAN's work, including on food and energy security. Therefore, it is important to promote stable and constructive relations among all ASEAN's partners to respond to these shared challenges. In this regard, further engagement and cooperation between ASEAN and its partners are encouraged, which will demonstrate ASEAN's commitment to an open and inclusive regional architecture which upholds ASEAN's centrality. To this end, His Majesty expresses support for the ASEAN leaders' statement on the 55th anniversary of ASEAN, which calls for ASEAN to remain inclusive and outward-looking, with strengthened centrality and unity in its engagement with external partners. Apart from that, ASEAN leaders also discuss on ASEAN's external relations and future direction, as well as exchange views on regional and international issues. In the afternoon, His Majesty the Sultan Inhan Pertuan of Brunei Darussalam attended the 25th ASEAN-China Summit held at Soka Phnom Penh Hotel, Kingdom of Cambodia. Accompanying His Majesty the Sultan Inhan Pertuan of Brunei Darussalam was His Royal Highness Prince Abdul Mateen. At the summit, His Majesty in the TTAP highlights that the People's Republic of China has been an important partner to ASEAN that contributes significantly to regional peace, economic growth and social progress for over 3 decades. The extensive economic cooperation is one of the pillars of the ASEAN-China Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. To this end, His Majesty welcomes the negotiations to upgrade the ASEAN-China Free Trade Agreement to ensure it is up-to-date, more business-friendly and resilient to global challenges. Touching on the technical cooperation agreement, His Majesty looks forward to the early implementation of the agreement that would strengthen human and technical capacities. The agreement is very much in line with the Global Development Initiative announced by His Excellency Xi Jinping, President of the People's Republic of China, at the United Nations General Assembly in 2021 to ensure long-term prosperity. His Majesty in his TTAP reaffirms Brunei Darussalam's commitment to strengthen efforts and goodwill for the full and effective implementation of the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea (DOC), as this year marks its 20th anniversary, as well as encourage respective officials to expedite negotiations towards the conclusion of a comprehensive and substance code of conduct to ensure continued trust and confidence in the region. Meanwhile, His Excellency Li Keqiang, Premier of the State Council of the People's Republic of China, in his statement highlighted the notable achievement of ASEAN-China dialogue relations in becoming each other's largest trading partners, given the impacts of COVID-19 and complex international landscapes.
The very principle that we shall keep to.
His Excellency Samnak Yekek Mahesina Pade Taicho Hun Sen, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Cambodia and ASEAN Chair, then delivered the ASEAN Common Statement on ASEAN-China Dialogue Relations, which, among other things, commended the implementation of the ASEAN-China Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Plan of Action for Peace and Prosperity 2021 to 2025, as well as appreciated China's contributions to the ASEAN COVID-19 Response Fund. At the summit, leaders discussed on enhancing trade liberalization towards regional economic stability and welcome cooperation between ASEAN and China in the fields of digital transformation and green growth. At the end of the summit, the ASEAN-China Joint Statement of the 20th anniversary of the DOC, ASEAN-China Joint Statement on Promoting Common and Sustainable Development, and the ASEAN-China Joint Statement on Food Security Cooperation were adopted. His Majesty Sultan Haji Hassan Al Bolkiah Muizzuddin Wad Dawla Ibn Al Marhum Sultan Haji Umar Ali Saifuddin Sadul Khariwaddin Sultan Yang Dipertuan of Brunei Darussalam this morning attended the opening ceremony of the 40th and the 41st ASEAN Summits and related summits, plenary session of the 40th ASEAN Summit and retreat session of the 41st ASEAN Summit, which were held at the Soka Phnom Penh Hotel, Kingdom of Cambodia. Accompanying His Majesty the Sultan Yang Dipertuan of Brunei Darussalam is His Royal Highness Prince Abdul Matin. His Majesty first attended the opening ceremony of the 40th and 41st ASEAN Summits and related summits, which was also attended by other ASEAN heads of state and government. Upon arrival, His Majesty was welcomed by His Excellency Samnak Yekek Mahesina Pade Techo Hun Sen, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Cambodia. The ceremony commenced with the ASEAN anthem, the ASEAN Way, which was followed with cultural performances and opening remarks from His Excellency the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Cambodia as Chairman of ASEAN this year, in which His Excellency welcomed all leaders and delegates attending the 40th and 41st ASEAN Summits and related summits in Phnom Penh. Following the opening ceremony, His Majesty and other ASEAN leaders and witnessed the photo exhibition on Cambodia's contribution to ASEAN. His Majesty's attendance to the ASEAN summits in Phnom Penh this year, among other things, marks a significant opportunity to reaffirm His Majesty's friendship with other leaders, as well as to continue discussions on the further strengthening of regional cooperation. In Atita at the plenary session of the 40th ASEAN Summit, His Majesty highlighted that over the last 55 years, ASEAN has made numerous achievements in maintaining peace and prosperity in the region. Therefore, His Majesty in Atita underscores that ASEAN should redouble its efforts to advance the community-building process by taking advantage of various opportunities such as digital transformation and the ongoing work in implementing and upgrading free trade agreements. This would help ensure ASEAN's competitiveness and resilience. His Majesty also welcomes the launching of the ASEAN Junior Fellowship Program in August 2021, which would equip the young people of ASEAN with knowledge of the inner workings of ASEAN and foster good relations among them. In striving to achieve a united and inclusive community, His Majesty expresses support for Timor-Leste's membership to ASEAN and to become an observer in the meantime, while finalizing the terms of accession. His Majesty adds that ASEAN is currently engaged in one of its most critical work through the post-2025 visioning process, in which Brunei Darussalam prioritizes an ASEAN with stronger neighborly relations as well as closer friendship and cooperation. In this process, His Majesty underscores that ASEAN needs to balance pragmatism and ambition to ensure that it remains stable and progressive while staying true to its identity. His Majesty Natita also expressed appreciation to His Excellency Datuk Paduka Lim Jok Hoi, Secretary-General of ASEAN, for his valuable contributions to ASEAN over the last 5 years and expressed support for Dr. Kau Kim Horn of the Kingdom of Cambodia as the next Secretary-General. His Majesty Latita also affirms that ASEAN needs to strengthen its institutional capacity and collectiveness to ensure that it can take advantage of its strategic value and skillfully navigate challenges and opportunities. Earlier, His Excellency the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Cambodia, in a speech, underscored the importance of collective endeavors to tackle existing and emerging challenges and reiterated Cambodia's commitment in ensuring that ASEAN community building efforts are sustained towards achieving peace, stability, security, and sustainable development.
His Majesty Sultan Haji Hassan al-Bolkiah Mu'izzuddin wa Daulah Ibni Almarhum Sultan Haji Omar Ali Saifuddin Sa'dul Khariwaddin Sultan and Yang di-Pertuan of Brunei Darussalam this morning attended the 25th ASEAN +3 Summit, 19th ASEAN-India Summit to commemorate the 30th anniversary of ASEAN-India Dialogue Relations and 2nd ASEAN-Australia Summit, which were held at the Soka Phnom Penh Hotel, Kingdom of Cambodia. Accompanying His Majesty the Sultan and Yang di-Pertuan of Brunei Darussalam was His Royal Highness Prince Abdul Matin. At the 25th ASEAN +3 Summit, His Majesty in His Tita expresses pleasure that the ASEAN +3 APT continues to be an essential platform for cooperation, including in times of crisis, as this year marks the 25th anniversary of the APT mechanism. In the Tita, His Majesty highlights that one of the lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic is the society's need for preparedness and resilience. This has led Brunei Darussalam to develop the Bandar Seri Begawan Declaration on the strategic and holistic initiative to link ASEAN responses to emergencies and disasters, ASEAN Shield, during its ASEAN chairmanship in 2021, aimed to improve coordination of existing mechanisms in ASEAN during emergencies and disasters. One of the APT mechanisms contributing to preparedness is the APT Emergency Rice Reserve, APTERR, primarily to ensure rice availability during emergencies. In this regard, His Majesty expresses the need to ensure that this mechanism is constantly ready and able to respond swiftly to food shortfalls in the region. His Majesty also suggests for respective officials to review the preparedness of the rice reserve strategically and holistically. At the end of the Tita, His Majesty emphasized that mental health is an issue that is often overlooked and can lead to significant productivity loss and socioeconomic consequences in the future if left unaddressed. On this matter, His Majesty welcomes cooperation among the APT to increase awareness and address this critical issue. His Excellency Yoon Suk-yeol, President of the Republic of Korea, as country coordinator for ASEAN +3 dialogue relations, in a statement, expressed hope for the future strengthening of cooperation between ASEAN and the +3 countries in facing multiple challenges, including food and energy security challenges caused by climate change.
This year marks the 25th anniversary of the APT.
The ASEAN +3 Summit was followed with a statement by His Excellency Li Keqiang, Premier of the State Council of the People's Republic of China, which highlighted accomplishments of the ASEAN +3 in the fields of food reserve and finance towards boosting its socio-economic development, as well as the stability of international and regional industrial supply chains. Meanwhile, His Excellency Fumio Kishida, Prime Minister of Japan, welcomed the steadfast progress in new areas of cooperation between ASEAN and the +3 countries, such as digital economy and resilient agriculture, and emphasized strengthening of cooperation in 4 key areas, namely maritime cooperation, connectivity, achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals (SDGs), and early recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. At the summit, leaders encouraged for greater collaboration and integration amongst the APT to strengthen the resilience of food supply chains, promote sustainable agriculture, as well as address digital gaps. After the 25th ASEAN +3 Summit, His Majesty then attended the 19th ASEAN-India Summit to commemorate the 30th anniversary of ASEAN-India Dialogue Relations, along with other ASEAN heads of state and government. At the summit, His Majesty delivered a tita highlighting that this year marks the 30th anniversary of ASEAN-India Dialogue Relations. His Majesty acknowledges that the partnership throughout the years has seen immense growth and expressed appreciation for India's contribution to the region's peace and prosperity. To this end, His Majesty emphasizes the need to make the ASEAN-India Free Trade Agreement simpler, more business-friendly, and responsive to economic challenges. Therefore, His Majesty welcomes all parties to review the ASEAN-India Trade in Goods Agreement expeditiously. His Majesty also emphasizes the importance of investing in the development of the youth by providing them with the necessary skill sets. Acknowledging India's leadership in digital science, including artificial intelligence, His Majesty welcomes cooperation in human capacity building through further collaboration between higher education institutions. Meanwhile, His Excellency Shri Jagdeep Dhankar, Vice President of the Republic of India, in his statement emphasized the multidimensional growth of ASEAN-India relations through engagements encompassing connectivity, climate change, security, technology, and trade. His Excellency Lee Hsien Loong, Prime Minister of the Republic of Singapore, as Country Coordinator for ASEAN-India Dialogue Relations, then delivered the ASEAN Common Statement, which highlighted the strong relations between ASEAN and India, enabling the exploration of practical cooperation towards greater trade and investment flows, as well as enhanced regional connectivity. At the summit, leaders welcomed the elevation of ASEAN-India relations to a comprehensive strategic partnership and encouraged for the harnessing of opportunities in digital development, healthcare, food security, and connectivity. At the end of the summit, the ASEAN-India Joint Statement on the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership was adopted. Following the 19th ASEAN-India Summit, His Majesty then attended the 2nd ASEAN-Australia Summit. At the summit, His Majesty delivered a tita acknowledging Australia as ASEAN's first dialogue partner and expresses pleasure for ASEAN-Australia cooperation that continues to grow from strength to strength despite facing crisis. His Majesty expresses his appreciation for Australia's steadfast commitment to ASEAN through the Australia for ASEAN initiatives, whereby several scholarships were offered to ASEAN member states, providing a foundation for closer people-to-people ties and contributing to regional resilience. This includes the country's valuable support on mental health cooperation, especially during Brunei Darussalam's chairmanship of ASEAN last year. Touching on the upgrading of the ASEAN-Australia-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, ANZFTA, His Majesty highlights that it is the most comprehensive agreement that ASEAN has with its dialogue partners, as well as encourages the substantial conclusion of negotiations and looks forward to the early implementation of the ANZFTA. At the end of the tita, His Majesty concludes that ASEAN-Australia's cooperation under the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership will bring meaningful and lasting benefits to the region. Meanwhile, the Honourable Anthony Albanese, Prime Minister of Australia, in his statement reaffirmed Australia's commitment towards cooperation under the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific AOIP provision of development assistance to ASEAN, as well as efforts towards net zero energy transition. His Excellency Pankam Vipavan, Prime Minister of the Lao People's Democratic Republic, as Country Coordinator for ASEAN-Australia Dialogue Relations, then delivered the ASEAN Common Statement, which appreciated Australia's support for ASEAN centrality and active participation in ASEAN-led mechanisms towards economic integration and stronger people-to-people linkages. At the summit, leaders expressed support for a business-friendly environment to ensure free flow of goods and services, as well as the exchange of knowledge and experience in areas of mutual interest, including digital technology and climate change. At the end of the summit, the joint statement of the 2nd ASEAN-Australia Summit on Cooperation on the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific was adopted. His Majesty the Sultan and Yang di Pertuan of Brunei Darussalam this afternoon attended the 25th ASEAN-Japan Summit. The meeting was held at the Soka Phnom Penh Hotel, Kingdom of Cambodia. Accompanying His Majesty was His Royal Highness Prince Abdul Matin. At the summit, His Majesty in his tita highlights that ASEAN and Japan share a deep and unique strategic and mutually beneficial relationship. as ASEAN and Japan will celebrate the 50th anniversary of dialogue relations in 2023. His Majesty expresses his view that ASEAN and Japan need to chart the way for future partnership to further bring prosperity to the people and region. His Majesty also emphasizes the need to work together to address climate change by continuing to implement the initiatives under the ASEAN-Japan Climate Change Action Agenda. In this regard, His Majesty encourages Japan's support for the establishment of the ASEAN Center for Climate Change in Brunei Darussalam. On the issue of aging society, His Majesty underlines the importance of this issue and recognizes the shared responsibility to provide them with the necessary support. His Majesty expresses the view that there is much benefit to society as a whole if the elderly can lead healthy and productive lifestyles, as envisioned by the ASEAN Comprehensive Framework on Care Economy. In ending the Tita, His Majesty highlights that ASEAN can learn much from Japan, particularly on policies being applied and adopting mindsets that lead to active aging to ensure the continued happiness and harmony of the societies and peoples. Meanwhile, His Excellency Fumio Kishida, Prime Minister of Japan, in his statement shared that Japan is prepared to work together with ASEAN towards the peace and prosperity of the region through efforts towards post-COVID-19 economic recovery and the maintenance of a free and open international order. His Excellency Prayut Chan-o-cha, Prime Minister of Thailand, as country coordinator for ASEAN-Japan dialogue relations, then delivered the ASEAN Common Statement, which highlighted that ASEAN sees opportunities in strengthening public health and resilience and economic partnership with Japan through the establishment of the ASEAN Center for Public Health Emergencies and Emerging Diseases, ACPHEED, and investment to fortify global supply chains, respectively. At the summit, leaders recognized that ASEAN-Japan collaboration should be enhanced, given the fundamental similarities and aspirations for the Indo-Pacific region through the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific and Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific. Furthermore, leaders also called for the strengthening of cooperation in green economy, mitigating impacts of climate change and disaster risk management. His Majesty the Sultan and Yang di-Pertuan of Brunei Darussalam this afternoon held a bilateral meeting with His Excellency Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr., President of the Republic of the Philippines. The meeting was held at the Soka Phnom Penh Hotel, Kingdom of Cambodia. During this meeting, His Majesty the Sultan and Yang di-Pertuan of Brunei Darussalam and His Excellency the President of the Republic of the Philippines, among other things, discussed on matters of mutual importance to strengthen long-standing relations between both countries. His Majesty also congratulated His Excellency in his recent appointment as President of the Republic of the Philippines on the 30th of June 2022. Diplomatic relations between Brunei Darussalam and the Republic of the Philippines were established in January 1984. Both countries share close and friendly relations through cooperation in the areas of economy, defense, and labor. His Majesty yesterday afternoon attended the 23rd ASEAN Republic of Korea Summit. At the summit, His Majesty, in his tita, among other things, highlights that the Republic of Korea is an invaluable strategic partner to ASEAN that has contributed to the region's growth, development, and prosperity. His Majesty emphasizes that the Republic of Korea's leadership in innovation can support the people of ASEAN to take full advantage of the fourth industrial revolution, such as utilizing technological developments in e-commerce that can benefit micro, small, and medium enterprises, MSMEs, in ensuring their continued growth and competitiveness. His Majesty further expresses his view that all parties need to work together in addressing the impacts of climate change, and therefore His Majesty welcomes the Republic of Korea to collaborate on developing policies to tackle the challenges through the ASEAN Center for Climate Change, which will be hosted by Brunei Darussalam. In concluding the tita, His Majesty also underscores on the importance of sub-regional work, in which His Majesty highlights that the BIMP Iaga remains a significant growth area with huge development, investment, and industrialization potential. Therefore, His Majesty expresses his appreciation for the Republic of Korea's contribution to the BIMP-IAGA Republic of Korea Cooperation Fund, which will further socio-economic progress. Meanwhile, His Excellency Yoon Suk-yeol, President of the Republic of Korea, in his statement reaffirmed the Republic of Korea's commitment to advance its Indo-Pacific strategy in alignment with the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific towards promoting open and inclusive cooperation. His Excellency Pham Minh Chinh, Prime Minister of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, as Country Coordinator for ASEAN Republic of Korea Dialogue Relations, then delivered the ASEAN Common Statement, which underlined further deepening of cooperation between ASEAN and the Republic of Korea through the promotion of comprehensive and cooperation and strengthened partnership for peace, stability, and security in the region. At the summit, leaders discussed on accelerating action to address climate change, efforts towards improving digital architecture, as well as deepening cooperation with the Republic of Korea in smart cities and green economy. Following the 23rd ASEAN Republic of Korea Summit, His Majesty then attended the 12th ASEAN United Nations UN Summit. During the summit, His Majesty in his tita expresses his appreciation to His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the UN, for the UN's continued support for ASEAN community building efforts. His Majesty acknowledges the COVID-19 pandemic has slowed the progress and hindered efforts to realize the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. To this end, the second SDG Summit in 2023, which is timely to review the ASEAN-UN approach to implement the 2030 Agenda, is welcomed. Therefore, His Majesty encourages ASEAN and the UN to work more closely and continue to promote complementaries between the ASEAN Community Vision 2025 and the 2030 Agenda. His Majesty then looks forward to work with the relevant UN agencies through the ASEAN Center for Climate Change in Brunei Darussalam to strengthen ASEAN's capacity to mitigate the impacts of the climate change. His Majesty also commended His Excellency the Secretary General of the UN for the common agenda in promoting a more secure and prosperous future. Due to global uncertainties and rising geopolitical tensions, ASEAN and the UN need to remain focused towards achieving common goals. His Majesty then wished His Excellency for much success in the preparations for the Summit of the Future 2024 to reaffirm commitment to the UN Charter and uphold multilateralism. Meanwhile, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the UN, in his statement highlighted that ASEAN as a region plays a vital role in dealing with the growing risks of a divided global economy and other challenges ahead through multilateral solutions.
ASEAN have a vital role to play.
His Excellency Samnak Yekek Mehe Sinapade Techo Hun Sen, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Cambodia and ASEAN Chair, then delivered the ASEAN Common Statement on ASEAN-UN Dialogue Relations, which acknowledged ASEAN-UN cooperation in support of regional efforts against the COVID-19 pandemic. In light of uncertainty and global challenges, ASEAN and the UN must work more closely together through constructive engagements to uphold multilateralism. At the summit, leaders called for stronger collaboration between ASEAN and the UN to ensure an open, rules-based international order to maintain peace and prosperity of the region, as well as support from the UN in dealing with food, energy, and security crises.
His Majesty Sultan Haji Hassan Al Bolkiah Muizzadi Wadawla, Ibn Almarhum Sultan Haji Omar Ali Saifuddin Saido Khariwaddin, Sultan and Yang the-Pertuan of Brunei Darussalam, today attended the 17th East Asia Summit and closing ceremony of the 40th and 41st ASEAN Summit, as well as related summits, and handing over of the ASEAN Chairmanship to the Republic of Indonesia, which was held at the Soka Phnom Penh Hotel, Kingdom of Cambodia. Accompanying His Majesty the Sultan and Yang the-Pertuan of Brunei Darussalam was His Royal Highness Prince Abdul Mateen. In a closing statement by His Excellency Samnak Yekek Mehe Sinapade Techo Hansen, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Cambodia, as ASEAN Chair, whereby His Excellency expressed appreciation to the ASEAN heads of state and government in attending the 40th and 41st ASEAN Summits and related summits. His Excellency the Prime Minister of Cambodia then honoured His Excellency Datuk Paduka Lim Jock Hoi for his contributions since his appointment as Secretary General of ASEAN. His Excellency the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Cambodia then handed over the ASEAN Chairmanship to His Excellency Joko Widodo, President of the Republic of Indonesia, through the passing of the ASEAN Chair's gavel as a symbolic handover to the Republic of Indonesia as incoming ASEAN Chair in 2023. The President of the Republic of Indonesia in his remarks outlined the Republic of Indonesia's priorities during its ASEAN Chairmanship under the theme ASEAN Matters Epicentrum of Growth, and a video presentation from the Republic of Indonesia as ASEAN Chair in 2023.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Sorry.
During the ceremony, Awang Haji Muhammad Iqbal Fakri Haji Namid of Brunei Darussalam was announced as the recipient of the ASEAN Prize 2022, in which he was honoured for his active leadership in youth movement and volunteerism, especially in the mobilizing assistance for displaced persons, which embodies the spirit of a people-oriented and resilient ASEAN community. Under Cambodia's chairmanship this year, leaders, among other things, agreed in principle to admit Timor-Leste as the 11th member of ASEAN and for Timor-Leste to be granted an observer status in ASEAN. This includes allowing its participation in all ASEAN meetings as well as the summit plenaries. ASEAN also elevated its relations with the Republic of India and the United States through the establishment of the comprehensive strategic partnerships with both countries. Meanwhile, the leaders' announcement on the substantial conclusion of the ASEAN-Australia-New Zealand Free Trade Area AANZFTA upgrade negotiations also marked the achievement of one of Cambodia's priority economic deliverables, PEDs, in which Brunei Darussalam is country coordinator for the AANZFTA. His Majesty the Sultan and Yang Pertuan of Brunei Darussalam today attended the 17th East Asia Summit held at the Soka Phnom Penh Hotel, Kingdom of Cambodia. Accompanying His Majesty was His Royal Highness Prince Abdul Mateen. At the summit, His Majesty in his Tita highlights that East Asia Summit EAS, as a premier leaders-led forum, has promoted peace, stability and prosperity in the region. Therefore, the EAS must remain strategically relevant for construction dialogue and multilateral cooperation, as well as mental health issues have the potential to further hinder socio-economic progress and overall well-being of the people. His Majesty stresses the need for all parties to continue working closely in sharing policy and practical expertise to help alleviate the burden. As a follow-up to the East Asia Summit Leaders' Statement on Mental Health Cooperation, which was adopted last year, His Majesty also calls for the need of our respective officials to look into developing an action plan to encourage regional and international cooperation on mental health. Meanwhile, ASEAN, His Majesty shares, is working on establishing a Centre for Climate Change in Brunei Darussalam to ensure the region is better prepared by mitigating its impact on food security and transitioning to renewable energy. In this regard, technical and scientific expertise from partners to assist the Centre in developing policies to address cross-cutting issues better are welcome. At the summit, His Excellency Charles Michel, President of the European Council, and His Excellency Zhang Ming, Secretary General of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization (SCO), briefed on food and energy security. Meanwhile, His Excellency Datuk Paduka Lim Jock Hoi, Secretary General of ASEAN, also reported on the key developments of the East Asia Summit, including cooperation in addressing global health issues, advancing towards a sustainable energy future, greater collaboration on regional and global trade, as well as maritime cooperation. Meanwhile, EAS leaders expressed their shared concern over global security challenges and furthermore called for peace resolution of conflicts to be achieved through dialogue, as well as upholding commitment to multilateralism. Leaders also hope for greater regional economic integration and enhanced EAS cooperation in digitalization and sustainable energy. His Majesty attended a session to mark the announcement of the substantial conclusion of the ASEAN-Australia-New Zealand Free Trade Area (AAN-ZFTA) upgrade negotiations, which one of Cambodia's priority economic deliverables (PED) for its chairmanship of ASEAN this year. The session held at the sidelines of the 40th and 41st ASEAN summits was joined by His Excellency Samnak Yekek Mahe Sinaphade Techo Hun Sen, the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Cambodia, as the chair of ASEAN summit this year. His Excellency Anthony Albanese, Prime Minister of Australia, and Her Excellency Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand. Brunei Darussalam is the country coordinator for the AAN-ZFTA, and its upgrade negotiations which started in 2021. The upgraded agreement will open up new opportunities as new elements have been incorporated into the agreement, such as micro, small and medium enterprises (MSMEs) and trade and sustainable developments. With the upgrade, the agreement maintains its high standards, responsive towards emerging challenges, takes into account modern trade practices, and remains commercially meaningful to businesses in the region. The upgraded agreement is also expected to facilitate growth and development of an inclusive and sustainable regional economy. His Majesty last night attended a gala dinner in honor of the ASEAN heads of state and government, leaders of dialogue partners and special guests who are attending the 40th and 41st ASEAN Summit and Relations Summits, which was hosted by His Excellency Samnak Yekek Mahe Sinaphade Techo Hun Sen, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Cambodia and Chairman of ASEAN. Accompanying His Majesty the Sultan and Yang di-Pertuan of Brunei Darussalam was His Royal Highness Prince Abdul Mateen. Upon arrival at the Troy Chang War International Convention and Exhibition Centre, His Majesty was welcomed by the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Cambodia. The event also featured a number of cultural performances. His Majesty yesterday afternoon attended the 10th ASEAN-United States Summit and the ASEAN-Canada Commemorative Summit, which were held at the Soka Phnom Penh Hotel, Kingdom of Cambodia. Accompanying His Majesty the Sultan and Yang di-Pertuan of Brunei Darussalam was His Royal Highness Prince Abdul Mateen. At the 10th ASEAN-United States Summit, His Majesty Natita highlights the U.S. contribution in ASEAN socio-economic progress and development and expresses appreciation for its continued support through leadership and educational programs such as Fulbright, Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative (ISALI), and the ASEAN-US Internship. which has helped build understanding among our people and strengthen their capabilities. In working towards regional recovery, His Majesty emphasizes that ASEAN and the US should enhance collaboration on digital infrastructures and e-commerce, particularly for the micro, small and medium enterprises. People and businesses are fast becoming more dependent on the internet, which exposes them to constant cybersecurity threats such as data breaches and fraud. In this regard, His Majesty looks forward to more capacity building programs and knowledge transfer from the US to strengthen cybersecurity capabilities. In concluding the Tita, His Majesty expresses confidence that the establishment of the ASEAN-US Comprehensive Strategic Partnership will be more meaningful, substantive and mutually beneficial. Meanwhile, His Excellency Joseph R. Biden Jr., President of the United States of America, in his statement emphasized that ASEAN is at the heart of the US's Indo-Pacific strategy and will continue to strengthen its commitment to tackle major issues, including climate change and health security, in pursuit of an Indo-Pacific region that is free, open, stable and prosperous. At the summit, leaders stressed on the need to ensure that the ASEAN-US Comprehensive Strategic Partnership will bolster economic recovery and regional resilience by promoting cooperation in maritime security, clean energy and digital development. At the end of the summit, the ASEAN-US leaders' statement on the establishment of the ASEAN-US Comprehensive Strategic Partnership was issued. Following the 10th ASEAN-United States Summit, His Majesty then proceeded to attend the ASEAN-Canada Commemorative Summit. At the summit, His Majesty Natita highlights that this year marks the 45th anniversary of the ASEAN-Canada dialogue relations. In moving towards a strategic partnership, Brunei Darussalam looks forward to increasing cooperation with Canada. His Majesty also highlights that the COVID-19 pandemic had shown the importance of enhancing cooperation in food security. In this regard, His Majesty welcomes capacity building programs and sharing of best practices in agricultural technology to ensure the region is better prepared. On launching of the ASEAN-Canada Free Trade Agreement negotiations in 2021, His Majesty highlights that this sends a positive signal of ASEAN-Canada shared belief in an open, rule-based trading system. Therefore, His Majesty looks forward to the conclusion of negotiations at the earliest, which will help build sustainable growth and bring Canada strategically closer to ASEAN. Meanwhile, His Excellency Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, in his statement acknowledged the growth of ASEAN and Canada relations throughout the past 45 years that has led to the strengthened engagements in the region. This includes negotiations on the establishment of the ASEAN-Canada Free Trade Agreement, which will allow Canadian businesses to enter markets in Southeast Asia.
On behalf of the organizing committee, we would like to express our appreciation for your active participation in all today. Thank you.
At the summit, leaders welcome Canada's forthcoming strategy on the Indo-Pacific and in turn underscore the importance of mitigating multifaceted challenges on the economy as well as promoting human resource development through investment in education. At the end of the summit, the ASEAN-Canada 45th Anniversary Commemorative Summit joint statement was issued.